They used to say in Chicago, vote early and vote often. I'm not sure if that translates in Eretz Yisrael, but God willing, obviously, I'm not in the business of any type of political endorsements either way, and it's over anyway. But God willing, HaKadosh Baruch Hu should give us the leadership that can help Yerushalayim and unite all of the inhabitants of all persuasions.
Amen.
And create a city of Shalom. Yerushalayim's original name was Shalem, which is actually city of peace. In fact, I wasn't going to talk about this, but let me digress a little bit. The etymology of the name of Yerushalayim is actually a very, very interesting etymology. The first mention of Jerusalem in the Torah is after Abraham was victorious against the 4 kings and he recaptured Lot. And Malchi Tzedek, the king of Shalem, brings Abraham bread and wine. And Chazal actually tell us that Malchi Tzedek was none other than Shem, the son of Noach, who was very old. And Malchi Tzedek, king of righteousness, was kind of the hereditary title for the king of the holy city. So the city's name was Shalem, and the king was called Malchi Tzedek. So the original name was Shalem, and that's the English Salem, right, where they burnt the witches, but that was the city of peace. So where do you get the Yeru? Where do you get the first part? So Chazal actually tell us it's like Minneapolis St. Paul, because when Avraham was willing to sacrifice Yitzchak on the Temple Mount, Avraham renamed that mountain, which was Mount Moriah, Mount Har Moriah. He called it Hashem Yireh. Hashem will see. Hashem will look down and see all that we have done to serve Hashem here. So therefore, the Yerushalayim is really 2 cities. Shalem is the regular city, and Yireh is the Temple Mount. Yireh Shalem says, well, close, but we're not quite there. So how do you get from Yireh Shalem to Yerushalayim? So Chazal say it's simply a matter, Yireh is Yud Resh Aleph Hey. So if you collapse the Aleph and Hey, right, 1 and 5, that gets 6. So therefore, the Aleph and Hey became a Vav. So it's Yeru Shalem. Now, that actually corresponds exactly to the English Jerusalem, but you still have a little bit of a problem. Where do you get the next Yud? Yerushalayim.
Plural, right?
And indeed, if you look in Tanakh, you will always see that Yerushalayim, although we read it Yerushalayim, is always spelled without the second Yud. So it is actually spelled Yerushalayim. So Chazal once again come to ours, as you said, Yerushalayim is a plural. Yadayim, Raglayim, Aznayim, Einayim. Yerushalayim are 2 Jerusalems, and that is not East and West Jerusalem. We don't consider that to be 2 cities, but rather it's the heavenly Yerushalayim, and it's the Yerushalayim on earth, and they have to be in alignment. And when they're not in alignment, we are in trouble. There is Chorban, there is Galus, and the like. And therefore, Yerushalayim is a combination of 2 ideas, which I want to talk about for a moment: Yireh and Shalem, and Yerushalayim of Mala and Mata. Now, what's interesting is this: although the translation of Yireh in the context is Hashem will look, Hashem will see, but Chazal point out it is the same letters as Yireh, meaning fear and reverence. So as a result, Chazal had a license to interpret the Yireh of Yerushalayim as fear and reverence of the Almighty. So it turns out, therefore, that Yireh, the Yeru, is the fear and the reverence of God, and Shalem is peace. And that is a very, very evocative combination of names, because it really encapsulates the dilemma and the contradiction and the polarity and the tension that exists within our holy city. And that is, Yireh, reverence of God, connotes a certain fire and a certain passion to serve Hashem, which by definition cannot be totally tolerant. A person who truly, truly believes that there's a certain way of serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu cannot look at other things and say, well, I'm okay, you're okay, that's the way we see it. So by definition, Yireh normally leads to a certain amount of intolerance. And yet, God, by combining the 2 names of Yireh and Shalem, is telling us your passion and your reverence for God must be connected to shalom, to creating peace and harmony among people. And in the world that we live in, we often find that people of yira are not always people of shalom, and vice versa as well. People of shalom are not always people of yira, because if I'm okay, you're okay, and if all ideas are equally legitimate, then there is no moral absolute value here. Everything is a matter of tam v'reach ein l'tvakeach. Everything's a matter of personal taste. So you can find shalom personalities and you can find yira personalities. But the city's very name calls upon us to unite these two opposite ideas. You know, I remember, I may have mentioned this before, so forgive me, many years ago, before I was even a shul rabbi, so I was a consumer of drashos instead of a producer of drashos. Those were good days, actually. But I remember I was in Baltimore, and I attended 2 drashos on Shabbos Shuvah, 2 different shuls. So the first shul was a modern Orthodox shul, which was pretty left-wing, meaning, because this is before open Orthodoxy, it wasn't as left-wing as Orthodoxy is today, but it was modern. Not everybody kept Shabbos exactly, but it was a very warm, friendly place, a nice place. You walked in, you were welcomed. So the rabbi gave the drasha about how important it was to greet people, b'sever panim yafot, and to be friendly and to be warm. Baruch Hashem, good message. Then I walked into a more yeshiva shul, in which everybody was very meticulous in all the mitzvahs, but it was a bit of a cold, forbidding place. You know, nobody welcomed you, etc. So the rabbi spoke about the importance of keeping Shabbos kahalacha. So I thought to myself, I was a little sarcastic then, it says, it would have been great if the opposite drasha would have been given in each place. Meaning, let the modern place hear about the importance of keeping Shabbos, and let the yeshivish place hear about the importance of being warm. The way it is now, each one is, what is it called? Preaching to the choir. Each one is hearing the things they're already good in, when in fact the challenge of tshuva for all of us is to go beyond our comfort level and to grow in avodas Hashem in precisely the areas in which we're a little weak. So the ish shalom must learn to be stronger in his religious commitments, and the ish yira needs to be more tolerant and understanding and respectful of other people, and reach people not through coercion, demonstrations, rejection, but through love and caring and compassion and the like. And this is the great challenge of living in Yerushalayim. You know, the Sfarim HaKadoshim tell us that the 4 traditionally holy cities of Eretz Yisrael correspond to the 4 elements. So it says Yerushalayim corresponds to fire, and Tiberia corresponds to water, and the Yam Kinneret, and Tzfat, which is very ethereal and airy, mystical city of Tzfat, is air, and Hebron, the dirt of the Kvarim, that is the Yesod HaAfor. But Yerushalayim is the city of fire. But fire can have good aspects and negative aspects. Fire could be passion, excitement, and fire could be machlokas and anger and hatred. You know, I remember I once had an occasion, I needed to take a taxi from Tzfat to Yerushalayim. We were at a Shabbaton, or Sameach at a Shabbaton in Tzfat, and I needed to get back. So we had a taxi, and the cab driver came to Yerushalayim, and he immediately is confronted with horns blowing all over the place. And he says he had been a cab driver in Tzfat for 25 years, and not once has he ever heard a horn blow on the street. And Yerushalayim, he's bombarded with noise. So the truth of the matter is, as soon as you get to Yerushalayim, you can sense a kind of tension, a nervousness in the air. Now, just like New York, the Havdalah. Now, you could say that's a sign of life, that's a sign of vibrancy, that's a sign of things happening. But at the same time, it's all too easy to have that turned into a bitterness and a machlokas, which we see over and over and over and over again in really virtually every area of life, certainly religious, secular, but even within religious and within secular. There is a concept, whenever there's a disagreement in Israel, there's very rarely any attempt to find a common denominator. It's always, you are an idiot who is 100% wrong, and the other side feels the same way, and as a result, it's very hard to be mitkadem in any particular way. So I think the very name of Yerushalayim is very, very significant, because on one hand it encapsulates this tension and this polarity, and at the same time it is telling us we need to strive to incorporate both elements in our lives. So the name is very significant, and we hope that with the Bechirot and whatever else happened today, that perhaps we can move in a good and productive way. I will tell you, I know that he's not going to win, and the Haredi candidate, Yossi Deutsch, I just saw the commercial. I just saw a commercial on YouTube. Had a very, very excellent commercial. I mean, I don't know anything else about him. I don't know his policies. But the commercial was, he says he is a Haredi, but he remembers the Yerushalayim. Now, I'm not sure if there ever was such a thing, but he says he remembers the Yerushalayim when you weren't labeled, that it didn't make a difference. And this is a magnificent mosaic of all of the different tipusim and all the different types, and together we build a wonderful place. Again, a very, very good commercial. And I hope, Ezras Hashem, that whoever is going to be the mayor and then the city council will carry forth that type of agenda. I also want to mention again as a aside, but it will tie into my main remarks, that all of us I know are very, very heartbroken about the great tragedy that occurred in Pittsburgh over Shabbos, which was a tragedy not just for the families who lost their loved ones, but really a tragedy for the Jewish people as a whole. And it is a sad reminder that we're still in Galut. We're still in Galut. The Galut is even here, but Kal V'chomer, it's there. You know, I can't help thinking, just a few days before, there was a Hasidic guy who was the first, I think, Orthodox Jew that has a mainstream record contract. He was actually signed with a mainstream company, I think Shalom Lemmer or something, and he was honored to sing at Fenway Park at a sporting event. He sang "God Bless America." I don't know why it wasn't the national anthem, but "God Bless America." And the last words, of course, God Bless America is, of course, also written by a Jewish guy, Irving Berlin, although not the most religious of Jews. He also wrote White Christmas, but okay.
Easter parade.
That's what?
Easter parade.
Right. By the way, I'm sorry for digressing. They have a story. I'm sure it's not true. They have a story that there was a very famous British Jewish philosopher, Isaiah Berlin, and one of the great intellectuals of the 20th century. And it says that during World War II, Churchill wanted to really have a meeting with Isaiah Berlin to get a perspective on the ideas that he needs to work on for the war effort. So he asked his aide to bring Isaiah Berlin to his office, to the war room under the Parliament. So they mistakenly brought Irving Berlin, who in fact was in London at the time, and they had a conversation for around an hour. And Churchill is said to have remarked, very nice man, but somehow he wasn't that well versed in philosophy as I thought. But okay, I don't know. It doesn't ring totally true for me, but this is a story that they tell. But anyway, the last line of "God Bless America" is "God Bless America, my home, sweet home." And although there is no question that the Jewish community, certainly the American Jewish community, and even in Israel, needs to be grateful to the United States of America for many, many things. The United States gave Jews opportunities. It gave them freedom. It allowed them largely to pursue their religion, to achieve economic prosperity. And anyone who simply says America is a goyish, corrupt society is really a kafui tov. And Rav Moshe Feinstein said many, many years ago that the United States was an example of Medina shel Chesed, a Medina, a country, a society that was built on respecting the dignity of human beings and treating them with kindness and compassion. So certainly a Jew should be a patriotic. If a Jew is an American, a Jew should be a patriotic American. But still, at the same time, you can't really consider it my home, sweet home. Our home is only here. This is our home. Different countries accommodate us at various times. Some do so with proper and noble and good behavior, and some do so with brutal behavior. We've been through all of the variations. But home, there is only one home. And I don't know, I don't want to be another, I don't want to connect it because, but I somehow just have these two pictures in my mind. somebody talking about home sweet home, followed by this brutal massacre in Pittsburgh. Now, it's true that this guy who did it in Pittsburgh is just a nut, just a crazy person, so you might say it's not indicative of anything, it's just a crazy guy acting in a crazy way. But still, even craziness is going to reflect a certain poison that is percolating through society. Meaning, if, for example, you had a racist society, then the craziness will tend to be hatred of blacks. So the very fact that the craziness was manifested as an act of anti-Semitism and a hate crime.
Rabbi, doesn't craziness diminish the crime in a way?
Yeah.
Instead of evil, this is the man's intent. He went against moral law.
Yeah.
As opposed to crazy, it's not really me. It's
well, you're right. Again, I mean, whether he was criminally insane, I imagine that's going to be decided by courts, and who knows. But you are correct. The line between crazy and evil is a very, very elusive line, and we can sometimes use it to excuse responsibility. After all, you could argue every mass murderer must have been crazy because normal people don't do mass murders. So what are you going to say? So Hitler is off the hook because he must have been nuts?
No, and Son of Sam went to jail for life.
Right, no, I understand. But I just meant to say, by the word crazy, I just meant to say that perhaps his behavior should not be indicative of tensions in society, but I would suggest that indeed there must be something there. So I guess the bottom line is that obviously our hearts and our prayers should be for the bereaved families, and we hope that Hashem will give them comfort and give them strength at a very, very difficult time, and our tefillas are with them. But at the same time, it's really such a tragic reminder that the Galut is not really the home of the Jewish people, and it's time to come home in various ways. Now, granted, we have incidents here as well. We're not so safe here as well, but at least, what do they say? If things are going to happen, let it happen where you're at home, and you're with your people, and then it'll be greater siyata d'shmaya, and all of this should lead us to pray for the Mashiach. So this is really a lead-in and an hakdama to what I wanted to talk about tonight. I wanted to talk about the idea of emunah and a certain aspect that emerges from the parsha. The Vilna Gaon writes in Mishlei a very, very amazing thought. The Vilna Gaon writes that the whole purpose of the Torah is to bring us to emunah and bitachon in Hashem. Now, how that is so, he doesn't really say, and I can't demonstrate it necessarily. How by wearing the Vilna Gaon. How by wearing tefillin do I come to emunah? I'm not sure, but he says your end goal is emunah ubitachon. Now, I want to first explain the synonyms here. We talk about two ideas of belief. There is emunah, and there is bitachon. What is the difference between emunah and bitachon? So emunah is more in the realm of the intellect. I believe that there is a God who created heaven and earth. I believe there's a God that loves me, that cares about me, that will sustain me, that will give me strength. And even though life will have its difficulties, and sometimes its tragedies, but emunah alone is cerebral. You believe it. But bitachon, which really means security, trust, serenity, is when you internalize the emunah on an emotional level. Right? I could be maimin in Hashem when I have 1,000,000 shekel in the bank. Of course, Hashem is the source of parnasa. But when I have 0 shekel in the bank, that's when I need to have bitachon. Bitachon is when, as it were, the rubber hits the road and one is faced with challenges, one is faced with difficulties. So, bitachon, we might call it as applied emunah. Emunah as applied to the particular circumstances of your life. Now, one has to understand how many benefits emunah has. Emunah gives you hope, it gives you courage, it gives you resilience. Emunah also gives you competence. By that I mean the following, or bitachon rather. That is, when a person lacks emunah or lacks bitachon, then when they are confronted with challenges, there's going to be anxiety. There's going to be fear. And when you make decisions out of fear and anxiety, the quality of the decision itself is not going to be as good. When you make decisions based on a calm understanding that Hashem is running the world and my job is to do the best that I can, then you will make good decisions, just from a totally practical standpoint. You know, army surgeons used to say, when they were talking about having to do surgery under extreme emergency conditions, that if a soldier came in with a severed artery, a bleeding artery, they would tell the surgeon, you can repair it in 2 minutes if you don't rush. And that was a very important message. Don't rush, you'll do it in 2 minutes. You rush, you're going to mess up, you're going to be nervous, you're going to slip, right? This is the thing, our incessant desire to get things over with because we're anxious and scared results in numerous mistakes and goofs. So they tell the story about the Brisker Rav, that the Brisker Rav was in the Warsaw Ghetto, and miraculously he was smuggled out, and he came to Eretz Israel. And the Brisker Rav had what we would call a nervous temperament, meaning he was always, in fact, Brisker, this very day, Briskers have a nervous temperament in the sense that they're always concerned were they yotzei a mitzvah or not. Did they do this right? Did they do that right? And they think and they rethink. It's kind of a spiritual OCD type of phenomenon.
Well, why the Briskers? Why did they do this?
Well, this was, well, the reason Briskers do it is because their leaders did it. Now, why their leaders did it, that goes back to the personality of people, why individual people do it that way. But the Briskers tend to imitate what their founding fathers did, the Beis Halevi, Rav Chaim, the Brisker Rav, etc. So in the Warsaw Ghetto, which was a very, very tense situation, in the Warsaw Ghetto, Jews were dying like flies every day. Some by Nazi brutality, some by starvation, some by disease, and some even by the bombings of the Allied forces and the like. People were dying. The Brisker Rav himself lost his wife, and he never remarried, and he lost some of his children, although Baruch Hashem, other children did survive. And the Brisker Rav seemed to have been calm. He was going about his business, he was giving shiurim, he was davening. He did not seem to be tense or nervous. So someone had the nerve, it's kind of a chutzpahdik question to ask, someone had the nerve to ask him, Rebbe, you're always such a nervous person. And now you have so much reason to be nervous. Why are you so calm in the middle of the Warsaw Ghetto? So the Brisker Rav answered, when it comes to doing mitzvos, that's my responsibility. Hashem said that's my job. When it's my job, I'm always worried I might mess up. I might goof up. I might make mistakes. But let's say you're in a situation where there's absolutely nothing you can do to help yourself. You're in a situation where you're literally totally at the mercy of other forces. Now, some people might go crazy and commit suicide. With me, it's the opposite, he said. That's precisely when I am the most calm, because when I no longer have the responsibility, I know that it's kulo Hashem, and Hashem will help me. Now, I want to emphasize that the Brisker Rav was not being Pollyannish. The Brisker, see, this is a very important point. The Brisker Rav was not saying, oh, God will make every story a happy ending. Everything will come out nice and cheery. He knew that wasn't the case. He knew there was a Holocaust. He himself lost his wife and some children. He saw Jews dying every day. The statement, Gam zu l'tova, does not mean, as people sometimes means, everything will come out the way I would like it to come out. There is tragedy. There is death. There is suffering. And that's going to be inexplicable sometimes. We don't have the explanations. And to offer an explanation, at best, might be insensitive, and at worst could be totally idiotic and irrelevant. So Gam zu l'tova is not the naivete of Pollyanna, although that has a certain role in life as well when you're optimistic. things turn out in a better way. But in a more deeper way, it's that things are not random and meaningless. That even in our struggles, there are opportunities for growth and opportunities for positive transformations. The person that I cite is a person who is not giving you a Torah perspective per se, at least directly, and that is, of course, Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl was Jewish, but Viktor Frankl had no Jewish education. He was an assimilated secular Jew, and in fact, his wife, at least his last wife, was Catholic. But Viktor Frankl, I think, is someone that we could call a genuine spiritual intuitive, in which, through his own cogitation, and we have to believe that God gave those things to him, he came up with ideas that are really what the Torah teaches. And Viktor Frankl was in the concentration camps. He was a psychiatrist, and he developed this idea of logotherapy, which is the name that he gave to his school of thought, which is man's search for meaning. And he pointed out, we have very little control over what happens to us in our lives. But the last control we have is how we choose to respond. And in every confrontation with evil, with adversity, with difficulty, with suffering, there is a moment of choice. Do you choose to respond with goodness and nobility and courage? Or do you choose to become embittered and broken and shattered? And the measure of a human being is the type of choice he makes to respond to his situation. And Frankl therefore developed the idea, which is really a theory of evil, so to speak, that evil is a catalyst in the universe to bring out the potential goodness of a human being in terms of how they respond to those difficulties. He gave the example that in the concentration camps themselves, he knew people before the war who, they were not tzaddikim, you would not have called them righteous. But in the camps, they risked their lives to give medicine and food to starving people. They became transformed. They became righteous. They became saintly. And had their lives just been normal without those challenges? Who knows? There wouldn't have been any particular occasion. Now, again, people say, well, isn't there an easier way to get people to be virtuous other than this? I mean, you needed a Holocaust for there to be a state of Israel. Some people, frankly, will say, I don't want to get into that debate, that if you needed a Holocaust for there to be a state of Israel, then it would have been better not to have a state of Israel and not have a Holocaust. I don't want to get into that particular debate. But certainly whenever you make the argument that evil can be a source of transformative good, there are people who will counter, it ain't worth the cost. That's too expensive a cost for whatever benefit you're achieving. I don't have the answer to that. I'm not going to answer the question because I don't have an answer. But all I can tell you is that Lamaisa, looking at it from the realm of practicality, we do know that adversity and challenge can be the catalyst of moral transformation. Now that doesn't mean it always happens. Just as there's a famous saying, God never gives you a test that you can't pass, I would paraphrase it with another saying, God never gives you a guaranteed pass. So in any challenge, we can and we do fail. So there's no guarantee over here. But at least potentially, again, Viktor Frankl points out, we can make that choice. And that defines us. So anyone, if you have not read Man's Search for Meaning, which is his most famous book, it's very worthwhile. By the way, I just heard, maybe Chabad likes to claim everybody, but Chabad claims that that Frankl, in the late 50s, his work was not regarded with much respect.
This is before Man's Search for Meaning or after?
I think it was even after he published it, but initially it was not accepted and people did not look at it very positively. It was considered to be too soft. It was not scientifically rigorous enough. And of course, he lived in Vienna, which was the home of Freud. And, Freud had different motivations that people have. So Frankl was apparently going to give up his career and just retire early or whatever it is. And somehow the Rebbe got a wind of this, and the Rebbe sent a shaliach to tell him, keep up your work, because your work is important for the world. And that encouraged him to go on. And the story goes that although he was married to a guy and was certainly not a Shomer Shabbos, but he wore tefillin every day. He put on tefillin. He didn't want anyone to know about it, but they discovered that he used to go into a room, he used to lock the door for 15 minutes, and it was discovered that he actually did put on tefillin, and he said it was a very, very important thing for him. So as we confront yet another tragedy in Pittsburgh and the like, this is a perspective that we could keep in mind. In fact, I'll tell you a story from the Holocaust itself that Samuel Wiesenthal used to say, the famous Nazi hunter. And he was also not an observant Jew, but he recounted an encounter that he had with Rabbi Eliezer Silver. And this was after the war, when the Jewish refugees were still in displaced persons camps in Germany. They had not yet decided where they would be going. And Rabbi Eliezer Silver was a great rabbi who came from Europe to the United States after World War I. Initially, he was in Springfield, and then Harrisburg, and then he went to Cincinnati, where he spent his career. And Rabbi Silver was a very colorful rabbi. In fact, very colorful. He used to wear this top hat, and he spoke a very heavily accented English. He was not fluent in English. But he was very flamboyant. In fact, they have a story that he was once an expert witness at a trial about a kashrus issue in Ohio. And he had to be qualified as an expert. You know, when you testify as an expert, you have to establish your credentials. So somebody asked him, is it true that you are the greatest living rabbi in the United States? So Rabbi Silver was quiet for a moment, and the judge said, you should answer the question. Rabbi Silver says, well, I'm not sure. On one hand, I want to be modest. On the other hand, I'm under oath, and I have to tell the truth. You know, so that's why I'm hesitating. But so anyway, Rabbi Silver had very strong political connections with an extremely powerful Republican senator, Senator Robert Taft. If you know your American history, Robert Taft was the son of a former president and Chief Justice, William Howard Taft. And Robert Taft himself was the majority leader of the Senate at a time when the Republicans controlled the Senate. So he really was the most powerful senator in the United States. And Rabbi Silver had a very close relationship with Robert Taft. Anyway, because of this, Rabbi Silver got permission to wear an American Army uniform to be able to have access to all the displaced persons camps, and nobody would stop him because he wore the uniform of a colonel, a U.S. colonel. So he shows up in Germany, and he's dressed like a United States colonel with a big beard. And there's a military policeman, an MP, who stops it because this does not look like an officer in the United States Army, and says, no, please show me your papers, show me your identification. And Rabbi Silver starts spurting away in Yiddish, saying, call Taft, call Taft, call Taft. And of course, that's so preposterous. That's like saying, call Queen Elizabeth or whatever it is. I mean, there's no havamina. There's no particular reason why the MP should believe that Rabbi Silver has any shaykhs to Robert Taft. But Rabbi Silver keeps on going and going and going. So finally, they're so exasperated that before they send him to jail, they decide to make a transatlantic call to call Robert Taft. Now, in those days, it wasn't like today. It actually took a half an hour just to make the connection, and the connection is not very good. But they finally get Robert Taft on the phone, and they say, Senator, I'm so sorry to bother you. This is so stupid that, I'm sure that there's no point here, but there's this crazy guy with a beard who doesn't speak English. I don't know what language he's speaking, and he claims, he's your best friend, and he has your authorization to do this. So Robert Taft knew right away who this was. He says, you have Rabbi Silver there? He says, let that man go, because if you do not, in a half an hour he'll be controlling your whole base. Just get rid of him. Let him go where he wants. Don't hold on to him. Okay. So Rabbi Silver devoted a lot of time going to the DP camps, visiting. In fact, you can see pictures of him in his military uniform. So Wiesenthal used to tell the stories. Rabbi Silver came to where he was, and he organized a prayer service, tefillah. And he noticed that Wiesenthal didn't go to the prayer service. So he goes over to Wiesenthal and says, why don't you daven with Yidden? Why don't you join us? So Wiesenthal said that after what I saw in the war, I don't daven anymore. So Rabbi Silver thought it was obviously the Nazi brutalities. He said, no, it's not what the Nazis did. It's what a Jew did. When I was in the concentration camp, I think it was Bergen-Belsen, I saw a Hasidic Jew who smuggled a sitter into the camp. And that was a very, very daring act of courage. If the Nazis would have discovered it, they would have killed him. And I was so amazed and impressed that he's a man of such faith, that he's willing to risk his life to daven to Hashem. But then I began to notice he was renting out the sitter to people in exchange for their bread rations in 5-minute increments. In other words, give me your bread for the day, you can have the sitter for 5 minutes. And he was doing it to men and to women and even to children who are religious children. And I said to myself, if a religious Jew, so-called religious Jew, could use his religion as a mechanism of taking bread out of the mouths of starving men, women, and children, I don't want to have anything to do with that religion. That religion is cruel, immoral, debased. That's not the God I want to connect to. This is Wiesenthal telling the story after the war. And Wiesenthal said, Rabbi Silver told me something that I have never forgotten. Rabbi Silver told me, why do you look at the man renting the sitter and taking the bread? Look at the people who are willing to give up the bread in order to have the sitter. Look at their commitment, look at their faith, look at their bitachon. Look at the fact that even under circumstances where God seems to have abandoned them totally, they want to serve him. Don't you look at those people and see something good and something special and something holy? Don't you realize that this is your nation and you can be part of them? And Wiesenthal said, the famous Nazi hunter, Wiesenthal said, ever since then, and he used to recount this story over the next 40, 45 years, I realized that side by side with the most radical evil can be the greatest potential for the nobility in how we respond. And of course we know this in Israel. Unfortunately, we know it too well in Israel. How precisely when there is tragedy, that often elicits the greatest responses of generosity and kindness and care and concern. Why can't we be so nice to each other when things are good? It's a good question. But somehow, it is the tragedies that often bring out the best and most noble responses, whether it's 9/11 in the United States, whether it was the kidnapping and murder of the 3 yeshiva students a few years ago, the massacres in Merkas Harav, and of course the terrorist incidents that still, L'tzarenu, are happening. So this is the idea of Gamzu L'Tova. Gamzu L'Tova is a more complicated idea. It doesn't mean things will have a happy ending, but it means that every experience in life is a catalyst for transformation. And the way Rav Soloveitchik put it, the problem of evil should not be approached as a theological problem. It should be approached as a halachic problem. What does that mean? Theology is trying to understand God. Why did God do something? That may be an unanswerable question. And of course, a lot of evil is not God per se, it's human choices. But halacha focuses on what is my responsibility given the reality I'm in. Halacha is focused on what do I do when I'm in this situation. That is a meaningful question. That is an important question. That is a question I might be able to answer. I might be able to say, what do I do with this situation that I have? How do I turn it into something good? Many of you might know the Mandela family, Sherry and Seth Mandel. She's kind of a bit famous now because she's already written 2 or 3 award-winning books Rabbi and Mrs. Mandela live in Tekoa, and around, has it been 10 years already? I don't remember how many years, but maybe around 10 years. They lost a child, a sweet child, Kobe, who was not bar mitzvah yet. He was, I think, 12 years old. And he and a classmate, Yosef Ishrad, were both brutally murdered. They were exploring the caves under Tekoa, beautiful, beautiful yishuv. And some courageous Arab freedom fighters took rocks, sharp rocks, and banged on their heads until their brains oozed out. Forgive me for being so explicit. And in this heroic act of self-determination, these two beautiful children were brutally, brutally murdered. I remember that, Kobe, in fact, they had come from Maryland, so they were good friends of my son in Maryland, and he was a classmate, and the like. And you can imagine, or maybe you can't imagine, what the Mandels went through. I mean, Baruch Hashem, they had other children, but to lose a child this way, to lose a child in any way, and then to lose it this way, just how it aches the heart, unbelievable. And the despondency was so great that they really, really didn't know. They didn't know how they're going to go on. They didn't know how they could take care of their other children. They didn't know how they could go on living. They didn't know. It looked like what do you do? How do you go on? And, and that's kind of an unavoidable part of the process. God forbid anyone that faces this is going to have that time frame in which there is utter, utter hopelessness. It's not even a matter of sadness. I mean, in a way, if you're sad enough to cry and sob, that already is a partial aspect of recovery. This is kind of a numbness, a deadness. You just don't know, the blackness of just being in a place that you just can't get out of. But what eventually happened, if you know the family, or if you know the story, is they decided to devote their lives to helping families that have been victimized by terrorism. And they've created a whole worldwide foundation called, in honor of their son, in memory of their son, the Kobe Mandel Foundation. And this is an organization that creates summer camps and retreats, and it provides medical and psychological and financial assistance and therapies and group workshops. And as a result of this tragedy that faced them, that no parent should ever, ever, ever face, they brought hope and strength to literally thousands and thousands of families. And indeed, Mrs. Mandela has written 2 books about recovering from tragedy and how to grow from tragedy. I mean, she is kind of almost the Rebbe, one of the Rebbes. There are others as well. One of the Rebbes of the generation, about how you take the most devastating evil that could befall you and you turn it into a source of positivity and growth and helping. And, it's easy for me to say it, but there are people who do it. And these are really the teachers of the generation that we have learned. Francos is another example, but again, there are in Eretz Yisrael, unfortunately, and other places as well, too many examples of this phenomenon. But it's an amazing phenomenon. It's a phenomenon that cannot fail to move you. How people can take the worst situation that one can imagine, and that becomes the source of the light that they bring to the world. The Zohar has an unusual phrase. The Zohar has a phrase, Butsina de Cardenisa. And in the very difficult Aramaic of the Zohar, this actually means the black light. The black light. Very unusual phrase. We normally associate the color black as the absence of light, right? When something's black, there is no light. Mm. The Zohar says, in the blackness, there actually is a light, although you can't see it. And this is what a person is able to uncover, able to kind of see the light, even in the darkness. It's not the light only at the end of the tunnel. It's the light in the darkness of the tunnel itself. There's a similar story. It's kind of a Hanukkah story, but we're close enough that I can mention it. This involves the Burger Rebbe, one of the great Hasidic Rebbes. He's not alive anymore now. The dynasty has been taken over by a descendant. But the Burger Rebbe, during the Holocaust, lost his wife and lost 11 children. 11 children, all of his children. He married after the war and had other children. And this is the first night of Hanukkah, 1944. So this is towards the end of the war. The war ended, April 45, December 44. As you know, if you know, this was in Bergen-Belsen also. And as you know, if you know the history of the Holocaust, 1944 was a very, very bad year for the Jews of Hungary in particular, because the Nazis already knew that the war was going to end, and it would not end with their victory. I mean, they already had a sense that things were not going to end the way they wanted, but they were absolutely determined to liquidate as many Jews as they could at the end, and therefore the ghettos of Hungary were liquidated in an extraordinarily fast way. The pace of extermination in Hungary was even more than in Poland. I mean, there were many more Jews in Poland, but in Hungary there was a very, very rapid extermination because it was towards the end of the war. And this was in 1944, December 44, Hanukkah. And the Kloisenberger Rebbe organized the lighting of the Hanukkah candles. Now, this was very, very dangerous. This had to be done in absolute silence. It had to be done very late at night, 2 o'clock, when guards were not watching so carefully. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, hundreds and hundreds of Jews are gathering. And they made a wick from the pajama uniforms that they wore. And they had some rancid margarine that they could use as a little bit of oil, and they were going to blow out the candle right away. They weren't going to let it even burn, and how long would it burn anyway? So imagine hundreds and hundreds of people, and they're all next to the Kloisenberger Rebbe, and he makes the first bracha, Lahadlik Ner Shel Hanukkah, and they say, Amen. And then he makes the second bracha, Sha'asa Nisim Lavotenu, he made miracles for our forefathers. Now it's the third bracha. The third bracha of the first night is Shehachiyanu, that Hashem has kept us alive. And he hesitated. He didn't make the bracha right away. He looked around, and he thought to himself, and then he looked around again, and then he made Shehachiyanu. And people said Amen. After he lit, and after the candle was blown out right away, there was a fellow who walked over to him, who was not participating. And he said, Rebbe, I don't believe in any of this stuff. I used to do it when I was younger, but after what I saw here, there's no God that I can believe in. You believe in it, I'm not questioning, I'm a tolerant guy. If people want to be religious, if it gives them comfort, so be it. But Rebbe, I have a question for you. I understand how you could make the first bracha, that God commanded us to do a certain mitzvah. Okay, if that's what you believe, so God commanded you to do a mitzvah. And Rebbe, I even understand the second bracha. He did miracles for our forefathers. You believe 1,000 years ago, or 1,500 years ago, there was a miracle of Hanukkah. Okay, there was a miracle of Hanukkah. But Rebbe, Shehachiyanu is thanking God for being alive to experience this occasion. Are you grateful to be alive? You lost your wife, you lost 11 children. Do you know how many Jews go to sleep every night in this place, hoping they will die and not wake up? Now it's true, by the way, this is an interesting study in and of itself, that the suicide rate among Jews in really throughout World War II was extremely low. There were some famous examples. The head of the Warsaw Ghetto committed, Adam, how do you pronounce Cernowitz? I don't remember if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but he what's that? That's another one. Yeah. But I'm thinking of someone else who committed suicide, and the inhabitants of the ghetto were furious over that. They saw that as an abandonment. They saw that as taking the easy way out instead of helping. So the suicide rate per se was extraordinarily low, and among religious Jews it was even lower. which is an interesting phenomenon. But still, many hoped and prayed that God would take their lives. So Rebbe, how can you make a Shechianu? Now, the Rebbe, to his credit, could have said, Shegitz, Apikoris. I don't want to talk to a person who doesn't believe in the Torah. The Rebbe didn't say that. The Rebbe said, you have a good question. And I didn't know what to do. That's why I hesitated. On one hand, I keep the halacha. The halacha says I'm supposed to say a Shechianu. On the other hand, God is a God of truth. And you don't lie to the Almighty. How could I lie? Thank you for letting me be alive when I too didn't always have a desire to live. I didn't know what to do. I have to make a bracha, but I'm not allowed to lie. What do I do? So this is what the Rebbe said. But I looked around, and that's why I turned around. And I saw the faces of hundreds and hundreds of Jews that had nothing, that lost everything, that had no particular rational reason to hope that their lives will ever get better. And yet they had faith, and they had courage, and they wanted to do what they could. And I said to myself, what a privilege, what an honor it is for me to experience the greatness of the human spirit and the nobility of the Jewish soul. And for that, the Rebbe said, I could make a Shechianu, even in Bergen-Belsen, to be able to see what the Jewish neshama is capable of. Mi ka'amcha Yisrael, who is like the nation Israel. Go yachad b'yaretz. So I think this is a reflection as we look at the most recent tragedies in our long, long, long tragic history. And these things happen. And B'chlal, the United States generally has become, and this happens to be a Jewish thing, so obviously it affects us much more deeply. But if you go through all of the different shootings, God forbid, it's almost a commonplace. Somebody shows up and massacres a bunch of people. And of course, what's going on in Europe is even worse. And we are in a situation where a lot of bad things are happening. A lot of tragedies are happening. And we need Hashem's mercy. But at the same time, it's our responsibility to ask, how do I generate light from the darkness? How do I see the light even in the darkness? How do we use these occasions as catalysts to create love and unity and togetherness and achdus? Maybe Hashem is showing us this is what happens when human beings are so filled with hate. It's not just, I hate you, so I'm not going to talk to you or invite you over for Shabbos. Okay, that's bad enough. But when you live in a world of hate, it turns into a world of murder. And it turns into a world of destruction. And Hashem is showing us the extremity of the tendencies that we might regard as relatively minor, but what those things can lead to. And therefore, the challenge that we have is to understand, to take the next step and build bridges of love and achdus and avat Yisrael. And in that way, perhaps counter the hatred that is engulfing the world on so many levels. So, B'ezras Hashem, may we grow from these negativities. And once again, our prayers and our thoughts are certainly with the families that have lost their loved ones. And may HaKadosh Baruch Hu bring us to the Geula Shleima B'mehera V'yameinu.
Amen.